Montana Territory, 1877. The snow-covered peaks of the Bitterroot Mountains stood like sentinels against the fading daylight. Gabriel Turner pulled his coat tighter as the December wind cut through the valley. At 26, he'd already lived more life than most men twice his age, fought in skirmishes with hostile tribes, broken wild horses that men said couldn't be tamed, and survived 3 winters alone in his cabin after his parents died of fever. The frontier had taught him one truth above all others. Love was a luxury a man couldn't afford in a land that took more than it gave. His breath clouded before him as he urged his palomino forward through the knee-deep snow. The horse's hooves broke through the frozen crust with each labored step. He was 2 days out from the nearest town, having chosen this isolation deliberately after the war. Here in this remote valley, he answered to no one and owed nothing to anybody. "That's the way it has to be, Bishop," he said to his horse, "you and me against everything else." The animal snorted in response, ears flicking forward suddenly. Gabriel tensed, his hand instinctively moving to the Colt revolver at his hip. In these mountains, unexpected movement could mean a bear, a mountain lion, or worse, men with ill intentions. What he saw instead stopped him cold. A figure stood at the edge of the clearing ahead, motionless as the surrounding pines. A woman, her back was to him, facing the vast expanse of untouched snow that stretched toward the mountains. She wore a dark blue dress, wholly impractical for the wilderness, with a woolen shawl pulled tight around slender shoulders. Chestnut hair tumbled in waves down her back, catching golden highlights from the setting sun. Gabriel remained still, calculating. The nearest homestead was 20 miles away. No woman should be out here alone, especially with night approaching and the temperature dropping fast. "Ma'am," he called, keeping his voice steady. She didn't turn or acknowledge him, just continued staring at the empty field of snow. Gabriel dismounted, the crunch of snow beneath his boots finally causing her to startle. She turned and he found himself looking into eyes the color of summer sky, wide with surprise and something else. Fear, no, something closer to wonder. "I'm sorry to disturb you," she said, her voice cultured with an Eastern accent. "I thought I was alone out here." "You should be nowhere near here, ma'am," Gabriel replied, keeping a respectful distance. "This valley's 10 miles from the nearest trail. Night's coming and it'll be 20 below before morning." She looked to be about 22, with features that would turn heads in any city salon. High cheekbones, delicate nose, and full lips now trembling slightly from the cold. Her dress, while well-made, was worn at the edges, a lady fallen on hard times, perhaps. "I know," she said, turning back toward the empty field, "but I had to see it again." "The place where it happened. Where what happened?" She didn't answer immediately, just kept staring at the unmarked snow. "There was someone here," she whispered. "I can feel it still." A chill that had nothing to do with the winter air ran down Gabriel's spine. Madness or grief, he'd seen both out here, where isolation could break even the strongest minds. Either way, he couldn't leave her to freeze. "I'm Gabriel Turner. My cabin's an hour's ride from here." "You can't stay out in this cold." She turned to him again, studying his face as if searching for something. "Katherine Rawlins," she finally said. "Most people call me Kate." "Well, Miss Rawlins, I'm offering you shelter for the night. Tomorrow I can take you wherever you need to go." She glanced once more at the field, then nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Turner, I accept your hospitality." As Gabriel helped her onto Bishop behind him, he noticed her hands, not soft like a lady's should be, but marked with the calluses of hard work. Another mystery about the woman who stared at empty snow as though she saw ghosts. The cabin was small but solid, built by Gabriel's father 10 years earlier when they'd come west from Pennsylvania. A stone fireplace dominated one wall and Gabriel quickly got a fire blazing. Kate stood just inside the door, taking in the sparse furnishings, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, shelves lined with provisions and a few books, and a narrow bed in the corner. "It's not much," Gabriel said, hanging his coat on a peg by the door, "but it keeps the cold out." "It's wonderful," Kate replied, sincerity in her voice as she removed her shawl. "You live here alone?" Gabriel nodded, filling a kettle with water from a bucket. "Since my parents passed 3 years ago, Pa built this place. Ma made it a home, now it's just shelter." "I'm sorry for your loss," she said, moving closer to the fire and extending her hands toward the flames. "Family is precious out here." "Do you have family nearby, Miss Rawlins?" he asked, watching her carefully. "Someone who might be worried about you." A shadow crossed her face. "No, not anymore." Gabriel didn't press. The frontier held countless stories of loss. He'd learned long ago that some wounds weren't meant to be probed by strangers. "You can take the bed," he said, changing the subject. "I'll sleep by the fire." "I couldn't possibly." "I insist," Gabriel interrupted. "My mother would haunt me if I made a lady sleep on the floor." The smallest smile touched her lips. "You're very kind, Mr. Turner." "Gabriel," he corrected. "Out here, formalities seem foolish." "Gabriel," she repeated, and something in the way she said his name made him look away, uncomfortable with the warmth it stirred. They ate a simple meal of beans, dried venison, and hard biscuits. Katherine ate with the careful manners of someone well-raised, but with the appreciation of someone who knew hunger. "May I ask what brought you to that clearing?" Gabriel finally asked as they sat with cups of coffee afterward. "It's dangerous country for anyone, especially alone." Katherine stared into her cup. "3 years ago, my brother William disappeared in these mountains. He was working for the Northern Pacific Survey Team, mapping routes for the railroad. His last letter mentioned this valley." Her voice remained steady, but her knuckles whitened around her cup. "The company said there was an accident, a rock slide. But they never recovered his body." "I'm sorry," Gabriel said, genuine sympathy in his voice. "The mountains can be unforgiving." "The strange thing is," she continued, looking up at him with those startling blue eyes, "I never believed he was dead. I've had dreams, vivid dreams, where he's standing in that clearing, looking toward the mountains." She gave a self-conscious laugh. "You must think I'm touched in the head." Gabriel considered her words carefully. "I think grief finds its own path. Sometimes that path isn't straight." "It's more than grief," Katherine insisted. 3 months ago I received a package, no sender, just my name and my address in Boston. Inside was William's pocket watch, the one our father gave him when he turned 18. It was working perfectly, wound as though someone had been using it." Gabriel frowned. "You think your brother is still alive?" "I think something happened that the railroad company isn't telling me. I sold everything I had to come west to find answers." She set her cup down with a decisive click. "Tomorrow I'll continue to Fort Missoula. There's a detective there who's agreed to help me." "That's another 3 days' journey in this weather," Gabriel said. "The pass might already be snowed in." "I have to try," Katherine replied, determination hardening her delicate features. "William would do the same for me." Gabriel nodded, recognizing the stubborn set of her jaw. He'd seen that same look in the mirror often enough. "Then I'll take you," he said, surprising himself with the offer. "These mountains are treacherous in winter. You'll never make it alone." "I couldn't ask you to do that." "You didn't ask, I offered." Gabriel stood, taking their cups to the wash basin. "We'll leave at first light." That night, as Katherine slept in his bed and Gabriel lay before the dying fire, he wondered what madness had possessed him to entangle himself in this woman's quest. For 3 years he'd avoided attachments, keeping to himself and turning away from the complications of other people's lives. Yet something about Katherine Rawlins, her courage or perhaps her unwavering faith in her brother's survival, had punctured the carefully constructed armor around his heart. "Just to Fort Missoula," he whispered to himself in the darkness, "then back to life as usual." But even as he drifted to sleep, a nagging voice in his mind whispered that nothing would be usual again. Morning brought 6 fresh inches of snow and a sky heavy with the promise of more. Gabriel checked his supplies while Katherine folded the blankets from his bed with practiced efficiency. "We should reach Jensen's trading post by nightfall," Gabriel said, strapping his rifle to Bishop's saddle. "We can rest there, then push for Missoula tomorrow." Katherine nodded, tucking her hair beneath a woolen cap Gabriel had lent her. She'd traded her impractical dress for a pair of his old trousers and a flannel shirt, both several sizes too large but secured with rope and pins. The transformation should have made her look ridiculous. Instead, Gabriel found himself noticing how the blue of the shirt matched her eyes, how the trousers revealed the graceful length of her legs. He looked away, busying himself with the saddle straps. "Ready?" "Yes," she replied, pulling on the heavy coat he'd insisted she wear. "Thank you again, Gabriel. Most men would have left me to my fate." "Most men have better sense than to go mountain climbing in December," he said dryly. Seems we're both lacking in that department. They rode double on Bishop, Katherine seated behind Gabriel, her arms tentatively circling his waist. As they descended from the valley into more rugged terrain, the trail narrowed, forcing them closer together. Gabriel found himself acutely aware of her warmth against his back, the light pressure of her hands at his sides. By midday, the promised snow began to fall, gently at first, then with increasing intensity. The wind picked up, driving the flakes horizontally across their path. Gabriel felt Katherine shiver against him. "There's an old line shack about 2 miles ahead," he shouted over his shoulder against the wind. "We'll wait out the worst of it there." She nodded, her face pressed against his back for shelter from the stinging snow. The line shack was little more than 4 walls and a roof, used by cattlemen in summer months. Inside was a small stone fireplace, a rough bench, and nothing else. Gabriel quickly got a fire going while Katherine brushed snow from their clothes. "This is getting worse," Gabriel said, looking out the single window at the white blur beyond. "We may be stuck here overnight." Katherine joined him at the window, standing close enough that he could smell the faint lavender scent that somehow clung to her despite their journey. "Will we have enough supplies?" "Food and water, yes, patience," he gave her a sideways glance, "that I can't guarantee." She smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her, and something turned over in Gabriel's chest. "I've been told I'm terrible company when confined," she admitted. "My finishing school teachers despaired when rainy days kept us indoors." "Finishing school?" Gabriel raised an eyebrow. "You're a long way from polite society, Miss Rawlins." "Boston society proved rather unforgiving after my parents died and left us with nothing but debts," she said matter-of-factly. "William went west to make our fortunes. I took a position as a governess until the watch arrived," Gabriel finished. Katherine nodded, turning from the window. "The family I worked for thought I was chasing fantasies." "Perhaps I am." "What will you do if you find him?" Gabriel asked, feeding another log to the fire. "Or if you don't?" "If I find him, we'll start over somewhere. If I don't," she shrugged, "then at least I'll know I tried. I couldn't live with myself otherwise." The howling wind filled the silence between them. Gabriel found himself studying her profile in the firelight, the determined set of her chin, the intelligence in her eyes. In another life, she would have made some Boston businessman a perfect wife. Instead, here she was, trapped in a line shack with a man who'd chosen to leave civilization behind. "Tell me about your brother," Gabriel said, sitting on the bench and gesturing for her to join him. "What kind of man chases railroad work in Montana territory?" Katherine settled beside him, close but not touching. "William was brilliant, studied engineering at Harvard, but always had more interest in unexplored places than in drawing rooms. He could recite poetry one moment and calculate the load-bearing capacity of a bridge the next." Pride warmed her voice. "He was all I had left after our parents died. And the railroad hired him to survey routes." "Yes, though his letters suggested he'd found something more valuable than a rail path." Her brow furrowed. "His last letter mentioned discoveries that would change everything and that he couldn't trust the company men. A week later, I received notice of his death." Gabriel frowned. "What kind of discoveries?" "He never specified." William could be frustratingly cryptic when excited about something. She pulled a folded paper from her pocket and handed it to Gabriel. This came with the watch. It was a rough map showing what appeared to be the valley where he'd found Katherine staring at the snow. A small X marked a location near the western ridge, with numbers written beside it. Coordinates. Katherine nodded. "I believe so. The detective I'm meeting, Mr. Holloway, says they likely indicate a mine location. This territory has seen gold and silver strikes." Gabriel studied the map more carefully. "This is less than 5 miles from my cabin. I know this ridge." "You do?" Hope flashed across Katherine's face. "Have you seen any signs of mining activity there?" "No, but I've never had reason to look." He folded the map and returned it to her. "The Northern Pacific has powerful interests backing it. If your brother found something valuable on land they wanted for tracks." "They might have silenced him," Katherine finished, her voice dropping to a whisper. "That's what I've feared." The storm raged outside, but inside the small shack, something shifted between them. Gabriel found himself telling her about his own past, his father's dreams of Western prosperity, his mother's quiet strength, the fever that took them both within days of each other. He spoke of his time scouting for the army during conflicts with the Blackfoot, and later, his decision to retreat to the mountains rather than rejoin a society that seemed petty and false after the rawness of frontier life. Night fell and they shared the meager provisions from Gabriel's saddlebags. The single bench was too narrow for both of them to sleep on, so Gabriel insisted Katherine take it while he stretched out on the hard-packed dirt floor before the fire. Gabriel, Katherine said softly into the darkness after they'd settled, "Do you think I'm foolish chasing ghosts?" He stared up at the rough-hewn ceiling, considering, "I think loyalty to family is never foolish. Even if the truth isn't what you hope for, you'll have honored your brother by seeking it." "Thank you," she whispered, "for understanding, for helping me." Gabriel closed his eyes, unwilling to examine too closely why her gratitude unsettled him. "Get some sleep, Katherine, tomorrow will be long." But sleep eluded him long after her breathing had deepened and steadied. For 3 years, he'd convinced himself that solitude was protection, that caring for others only guaranteed pain when the harsh frontier inevitably took them. Yet in just one day, Katherine Rawlins had made him question whether isolation was wisdom or merely fear, dressed as strength. The storm passed during the night, leaving a transformed landscape of pristine white broken only by the skeletal shapes of trees. Gabriel estimated 2 feet of fresh snow had fallen, enough to make travel difficult but not impossible. "We won't make Jensen's today," he told Katherine as they prepared to leave. "But there's another cabin about 10 miles south that should give us shelter." Katherine nodded, her determination evident in the set of her shoulders. "Lead on." The going was slow, Bishop struggling through drifts that sometimes reached his chest. By midday, they'd covered less than 5 miles, and Gabriel was considering making camp in a protected grove when Katherine suddenly stiffened behind him. "Gabriel," she whispered, her hands tightening at his waist. "Someone's following us." He turned slightly, scanning the ridge behind them. At first he saw nothing but snow-laden pines, then he caught it, a flash of movement quickly concealed, a rider keeping to the tree line. "How long have you noticed?" he asked quietly, maintaining their pace. "About an hour. I thought it might be my imagination until I saw sunlight reflect off something metal." Gabriel's mind worked rapidly. They were in open country, too exposed for comfort. The cabin he'd mentioned was still hours away. If their pursuer meant harm, they were at a significant disadvantage. "There's a narrow pass ahead," he said. "Better defensive position, hold tight." He urged Bishop forward, increasing their pace just enough to reach the rocky outcropping that marked the entrance to the pass before their shadow could close the distance. Once there, Gabriel dismounted quickly, helping Katherine down. "Stay with Bishop," he instructed, retrieving his rifle from its saddle holster. "If shots are fired, get on him and ride hard toward the south. Follow the creek bed." Fear flickered in her eyes, but she nodded, taking the horse's reins. Gabriel positioned himself behind a large boulder, rifle ready, and waited. 10 minutes passed before he caught sight of their follower, a single rider on a dark horse, moving cautiously toward the pass. The man's face was obscured by a heavy scarf, but his bearing suggested confidence, not the wariness of someone tracking potential prey. When the rider was 30 yards away, Gabriel called out, "That's far enough, state your business." The rider reined in sharply, his hand moving toward his side. Not for a weapon, Gabriel noted, but in a gesture of peace. "I'm looking for Katherine Rawlins," the man called back, his voice muffled by the scarf. "I mean no harm." Katherine gasped behind Gabriel. Before he could stop her, she stepped from behind the rocks. "I'm Katherine Rawlins." "Who are you?" The rider dismounted, pulling down his scarf to reveal a weather-beaten face with a neatly trimmed beard streaked with gray. "Thomas Holloway, ma'am, private detective from Missoula. When you didn't arrive as scheduled, I came looking." Gabriel kept his rifle trained on the man. "Convenient timing, Mr. Holloway. How'd you know to find us here?" "I didn't," Holloway replied, keeping his hands visible. "I was checking all possible routes from Fort Ellis, saw your tracks in the snow." He addressed Katherine directly. "Your letter mentioned a map, Miss Rawlins. I believe I've identified the location it indicates." Katherine stepped forward, but Gabriel caught her arm. "Wait," he murmured. "Something doesn't feel right." She hesitated, looking from Gabriel to Holloway. "You said we'd meet in Missoula, Mr. Holloway. Your telegram was specific about that." A flicker of something annoyance crossed Holloway's face before he smiled reassuringly. "Indeed, but when the storm hit, I grew concerned. A young woman traveling alone in this territory," he spread his hands. "I felt responsible for your safety." "How thoughtful," Katherine replied, her voice cooling noticeably. "But as you can see, I'm not alone." Holloway's gaze shifted to Gabriel, assessing. So I see, and you are. Someone who doesn't like coincidences, Gabriel answered. Or men who track women through mountain passes. Tension crackled between them, broken only when Katherine placed a gentle hand on Gabriel's arm. Perhaps we should all continue to Missoula together, she suggested. Where we can discuss my brother's case properly. Holloway nodded, though his smile didn't reach his eyes. A sensible suggestion. Shall we proceed? They traveled together, Holloway riding slightly ahead, while Gabriel and Katherine followed on Bishop. I don't trust him, Gabriel whispered against her ear. His story has too many convenient parts. Neither do I, she whispered back. The real Thomas Holloway has a distinctive scar across his right cheek. My brother mentioned it in a letter. This man's face is unmarked. Gabriel's arm tightened protectively around her waist. Then who is he? Someone who wants the map, Katherine said grimly, which means William really did find something valuable. They rode in uneasy silence until dusk, when Holloway, or whoever he was, suggested making camp in a sheltered ravine. Gabriel insisted on taking first watch, positioning himself where he could observe both their unwanted companion and the surrounding area. Hours passed. The impostor slept, or pretended to, while Katherine rested uneasily near the small fire. Gabriel was contemplating waking her for a quiet conversation when a sound from the darkness behind him froze his blood. The unmistakable click of a revolver being cocked. Don't move, Turner, came a low voice, not Holloway's but another man entirely. Or the lady gets a bullet first. Gabriel turned slowly to find two men emerging from the shadows, rifles aimed at Katherine's sleeping form. A glance toward Holloway showed the man now awake and smiling coldly, any pretense of friendliness gone. You played your part well, Parker, one of the newcomers said to the false Holloway. The girl made it easy, Parker replied, standing and brushing snow from his coat. Desperate to find her dead brother, pathetic, really. Katherine was awake now, her eyes wide with fear but her chin lifted defiantly. What have you done with William? She demanded. The apparent leader of the group, a tall man with a jagged scar across his throat, laughed harshly. William Rawlins has been feeding worms for 3 years, lady. Just like you two will be if we don't get what we came for. Gabriel calculated their odds, 3 armed men against his single rifle, with Katherine's safety to consider. Not good. The map, Parker said, approaching Katherine. Hand it over and perhaps we'll be merciful. What map? Gabriel interrupted, drawing attention away from Katherine. We're just travelers caught in a storm. The leader snorted, Save it, Cowboy. We've been tracking the Rawlins girl since she left Boston. She's got a map to the biggest copper deposit in the territory, land that rightfully belongs to Northern Pacific. William found copper, Katherine breathed, understanding dawning on her face. That's what he couldn't tell me in his letters. Your brother was smart enough to find it, not smart enough to keep his mouth shut about it, Parker said with a shrug. Now the map, last chance. Gabriel caught Katherine's eye, giving an almost imperceptible nod toward Bishop, who was tethered at the edge of their camp. If he could create a distraction, it's in my coat, Katherine said, slowly reaching for the garment folded beside her. I'll get it. As she moved, Gabriel suddenly lunged for the nearest gunman, tackling him into the snow. A shot cracked the night air, going wide. Katherine scrambled toward Bishop as Gabriel grappled with his opponent. Run, Gabriel shouted, taking a heavy blow to the ribs but managing to wrench the man's rifle away. Katherine had reached Bishop and was frantically untying the reins when Parker caught her, his hand tangling in her hair. She cried out, struggling against his grip. Gabriel swung the rifle like a club, catching his attacker across the temple and dropping him unconscious. He turned to help Katherine, but a searing pain exploded in his left shoulder as the leader's bullet found its mark. He staggered, fighting to stay upright. Enough, the leader barked, his gun now aimed at Gabriel's head. The map, girl, or your protector dies right now. Katherine ceased struggling, tears streaming down her face. I'll give you the map, she said, just don't hurt him anymore. Katherine, don't, Gabriel began, but the leader smashed the butt of his pistol against Gabriel's wounded shoulder, dropping him to his knees in agony. The map, Parker demanded again, releasing Katherine's hair but keeping a tight grip on her arm. With shaking hands, she reached into her pocket and produced the folded paper. Parker snatched it, examining it by the firelight with a satisfied grin. This is it, he confirmed to the leader. Rawlins marked the entire vein. Good, the leader said, his gun still trained on Gabriel. Finish them both, no witnesses. Parker drew his revolver, pointing it at Katherine's head. Ladies first. The world slowed for Gabriel. Through the haze of pain, he saw Katherine's face, not filled with fear as he expected, but with a fierce, calm determination. Her eyes met his, conveying something he couldn't quite understand. Then she moved faster than he would have thought possible. Her hand darted inside her borrowed shirt, emerging with a small Derringer pistol, the kind ladies sometimes carried for protection, easily concealed. Before Parker could react, she fired point-blank into his chest. The leader swung his gun toward Katherine, but Gabriel was already moving, ignoring the fire in his shoulder as he tackled the man into the snow. They rolled, struggling for control of the weapon. A deafening report and hot pain seared across Gabriel's side. He managed to pin the man's gun hand with his knee, delivering 2 solid blows to his face before the fight went out of him. Breathing heavily, Gabriel retrieved the fallen pistol and staggered to his feet. Katherine stood frozen, the small Derringer still clutched in her trembling hand. Parker's body crumpled at her feet. "Are you hurt?" Gabriel gasped, pressing his good hand against the bleeding graze at his side. She shook her head mutely, staring at what she'd done. Then, as if a dam had broken, she rushed to Gabriel, supporting him as his legs threatened to give way. "We need to bind your wounds," she said, her voice steadier than her hands. "Then we have to go, there could be more of them." As she helped him to sit by the fire and began tearing strips from her petticoat for bandages, Gabriel looked at her with new eyes. "Where did you get the Derringer?" "It was William's," she said, gently cleaning his shoulder wound. "I found it among his effects the railroad company returned. I've carried it ever since." She worked quickly, with the efficiency of someone who had nursed before. When both wounds were bound as best she could manage, she helped Gabriel onto Bishop. The third man was beginning to stir, but Katherine had secured his hands and feet with leather straps from their supplies. "The map," Gabriel said suddenly, remembering. Parker took it. Katherine mounted behind him, her arms encircling his waist carefully to avoid his injuries. "It doesn't matter," she said, urging Bishop forward into the night. "I memorized it, and now I know why William died." They rode through the darkness, following a game trail Gabriel knew would eventually connect with the main road to Fort Missoula. Katherine's warmth against his back was the only thing keeping him upright as blood loss and pain threatened to overwhelm him. "Stay with me, Gabriel," she whispered against his ear when he swayed dangerously in the saddle. "Just a little farther." "Never thought dying would feel so nice," he mumbled, leaning back against her. "You are not dying," she said fiercely. "Not after saving my life, not after." She trailed off, her arms tightening around him. Gabriel wanted to ask what she meant to say, but darkness was creeping in from the edges of his vision. The last thing he remembered was Katherine's voice, strong and determined, telling him stories about Boston to keep him conscious, stories about a life so far removed from his own that they seemed like fairy tales. Gabriel awoke to the unfamiliar sensation of clean sheets and the smell of carbolic soap. His shoulder throbbed dully, but the fire of infection he half expected was absent. Sunlight streamed through a window to his right, illuminating a small but tidy room with whitewashed walls. "Welcome back," came a familiar voice. He turned his head to find Katherine sitting beside his bed, a book open in her lap. She looked different, her hair neatly arranged, wearing a simple blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes, rested, beautiful. "Where?" His voice came out as a croak. "Fort Missoula," she supplied, setting aside her book to pour him a glass of water from a pitcher. "The infirmary specifically. You've been here 3 days." Gabriel accepted the water gratefully, his mind piecing together fragments of memory. "The men who attacked us." "The one she hesitated. "Shot didn't survive, the leader is in custody. The third man escaped, but the army is searching for him." She helped him sit up slightly, adjusting his pillows. "I reported everything to Captain Edmonds. He sent a wire to Northern Pacific's Board of Directors in St. Paul, demanding an explanation for their employees' actions." Gabriel studied her face, noting new lines of weariness around her eyes despite her composed appearance. "And your brother?" Sadness flickered across her features. "Captain Edmonds confirmed William is dead. They found his grave last spring. A proper marker was placed, but no one knew to inform me." She straightened her shoulders. "But he died honorably, Gabriel. He refused to falsify his survey reports to benefit Northern Pacific's land acquisitions. The copper deposit he found was on land promised to the Salish tribe by treaty." "I'm sorry, Katherine," Gabriel said softly. "About your brothers, about everything." She gave him a small, brave smile. William stood by his principles. I can honor that even in my grief. She reached for his hand, her fingers cool against his. The captain has also verified that the coordinates on the map mark a significant copper deposit. As William's only heir, I have the right to file a claim. That's good, Gabriel said, though a hollow feeling spread in his chest. With her brother's discovery verified and justice in progress, Katherine would have no reason to remain in Montana territory. She would return to Boston, to civilization, to a life where someone like him had no place. I've been thinking, Katherine said, interrupting his thoughts, about what to do next. Gabriel nodded, trying to appear supportive when all he wanted was to ask her to stay, an impossible, selfish request he had no right to make. The deposit is valuable, she continued, but I have no interest in mining it myself. I've spoken with Captain Edmonds about arranging for the Salish tribe to receive fair compensation for the minerals on their land. That's honorable, Gabriel said, meaning it. Few in her position would consider the tribe's rights. As for me, she paused, her fingers tightening around his, I find I'm not eager to return east. Gabriel's heart stuttered, no. The Montana territory has a certain appeal, she said, her eyes meeting his with unexpected boldness. Particularly a certain valley with a small cabin that keeps the cold out. For a moment Gabriel couldn't speak, couldn't process what she seemed to be suggesting. Katherine, you barely know me, he finally managed. And I'm not the kind of man who saves a stranger from freezing in the snow, she interrupted gently, who risks his life to protect someone he just met. Who shows more honor and kindness in 3 days than most men I've known my entire life. She leaned closer, her free hand coming to rest lightly on his uninjured shoulder. I know enough, Gabriel Turner. I know that when I thought you might die, I couldn't bear it. I know that for the first time since William disappeared, I felt something besides grief when you were near. The frontier is hard on women, Gabriel warned, even as hope began to unfurl in his chest. Lonely, dangerous. It's also honest, she countered, real in a way Boston society never was, and it wouldn't be lonely if, she faltered, suddenly uncertain. Unless I've misunderstood. Unless you prefer your solitude. Gabriel reached up, brushing a strand of chestnut hair from her face. I thought solitude was safer than caring about someone who might be taken away, he admitted. The mountains taught me to expect loss. And what are they teaching you now? She asked softly. That some risks are worth taking, he said, pulling her gently toward him until their foreheads touched. That maybe I've been surviving, not living. Her smile bloomed, warm and genuine. Then perhaps we can learn to live properly together. When their lips met, Gabriel knew with absolute certainty that his solitary cabin would never be merely shelter again. Somehow, this woman who had come west chasing ghosts had found something neither of them expected, a future where the harsh frontier could be faced together, where loss wasn't the inevitable conclusion to caring. 3 months later, as spring began to thaw the mountain passes, Gabriel stood at the edge of their newly expanded cabin, watching Katherine in the garden they'd planted together. Captain Edmonds had made good on his promise, securing fair compensation for the Salish tribe and ensuring that Northern Pacific faced consequences for their role in William Rawlins' death. Katherine had used a portion of her settlement to purchase additional acreage adjoining Gabriel's land, with plans for a small horse breeding operation that would combine his skills with her head for business. The snow had melted from the clearing where he'd first found her, revealing tender green shoots pushing through the soil. Life continuing, renewing, despite what had been lost beneath the winter blanket. Katherine straightened from her work, catching sight of him watching her. She smiled, that full, radiant smile that still made his breath catch, and beckoned him over. As he walked toward her, Gabriel marveled at how quickly certainty had replaced doubt, how naturally they'd fallen into the rhythm of shared days and nights. "What are you thinking about so seriously?" she asked as he reached her, slipping her soul-covered hand into his. Gabriel looked toward the mountains, then back to the woman who had taught him that isolation wasn't strength but fear. "I was thinking about snow," he said, "and how sometimes what appears to be an empty field can hold the most important things if you're just willing to look beneath the surface." Katherine's eyes softened with understanding. She stretched up on tiptoes to kiss him, tasting of sunshine and promise. "William led me here," she said quietly, "not to find him but to find you, to find us." Gabriel nodded, drawing her close as the Montana spring unfurled around them. The frontier would always be harsh, always demand its price in hardship and sacrifice. but no longer would he face it alone, locked behind walls of his own making. Katherine had shown him a different path, one where vulnerability wasn't weakness but courage, where loving deeply was the truest form of strength. Together, they turned toward their cabin, toward the life they were building day by day. The snow had melted, but what it had revealed would last far beyond the changing seasons.